Attention, listeners. Do you ever find yourself struggling to decide what to watch on a Saturday night when you're in the mood for horror? Or perhaps you're trying to round out your own horror film education. In either case, I'm sure you'll be able to make some great discoveries in my 10 by 10 horror watch list, featuring a breakdown of the 10 favorite horror movies from 10 renowned horror directors. We did a deep dive of the favorite horror movies from directors including Guillermo del Toro, Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Quentin Tarantino, James Gunn, Rob Zombie, Martin Scorsese, and many, many more. Here you'll find a collection of each director's favorite horror movies, along with quotes about what they appreciated about the films, all in an easy-to-reference PDF that you can download absolutely free. Featuring a mix of well-worn classics and deep cuts, hopefully you'll discover some overlooked gems and look at old classics through new lenses. Download the 10 by 10 horror watch list for free by visiting nicktaylor.com/horror guide. That's nicktaylor.com/horror guide. One last thing before we begin, and this is my email newsletter, The Howl. The Howl is a monthly rundown of the latest horror news along with my hand-picked movie recommendations, updates from the show, and cool stuff I've recently discovered, all in one quick read email delivered to your inbox only once a month. Easy to read, easy to sign up for, and easy to cancel. Join the Howl newsletter by visiting nicktaylor.com/thehowl. That's nicktaylor.com/thehowl. Welcome back to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. As always, each episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show explores how today's horror filmmakers are getting their movies made while deconstructing their methods and career strategies into practical insights that you can use on your own horror filmmaking journey. This includes creative processes, funding resources, favorite books and tools, key life lessons, and much, much more. Today we have a dynamic duo, director Anthony DiBlasi and his wife, actress Natalie Victoria. After graduating from Emerson College and moving to Los Angeles, Anthony became a protégé of Clive Barker and worked alongside him on films including Midnight Meat Train and 2009's Book of Blood. Anthony then made his directorial debut with the thriller Dread, which was based on a Clive Barker short story. One of Anthony's most acclaimed films was Last Shift, released in 2015 by Magnolia Pictures. His filmography also includes the psychological thriller Extremity from 2018. Now let's talk about Anthony's wife, Natalie Victoria. Beginning her career in theater, Natalie has earned multiple awards and recognition for her acting and writing. Natalie's acted in multiple features, short films, and plays, including the comedy Deadheads and The Last Shift. Natalie is also in Anthony's latest release, MALUM, which is actually a remake of Last Shift. The film follows a rookie police officer as she uncovers the eerie connection between her father's death and a vicious cult during her shift at a decommissioned police station. As the lone officer on duty, she finds herself in the midst of a terrifying series of paranormal events while learning the shocking truth about her family's history with the cult. In today's conversation, we get into the importance of building trust with your actors, how to craft horror based on your personal fears, and Anthony's 10 years working with Clive Barker. Here for your listening pleasure are Natalie Victoria and Anthony DiBlasi. So, in terms of subject matter, this dealt with a lot of very intense subject matter like demonic possession and cults, satanic cults. What was the research process like?
Well, since Scott and I wrote Last Shift, right? So we'll talk about this briefly. Right? This is a reimagining of Last Shift that we did in 2014, almost a decade later. So, we did a lot of our homework then.
Okay.
Because I think that my basic premise for that film, number one, being very contained, was, the Manson family's scary, but they'd be scarier if they were ghosts. So, that's the starting point. And then we ended up in the police station. So for this one, it was kind of like, oh, we know what we're doing. We know the parameters. So, the world has changed a bit since Last Shift. We wanted to deepen the mythology. I think the biggest change was we didn't really want it to be a satanic cult. We wanted to create our own mythology with the cult. We wanted people to hear terms they hadn't heard before. Going in, they'll think, oh, it's demons and stuff, and then we kind of present something a little different, something that's not quite satanic, but it's something completely different there.
Yeah.
So that was a big challenge, and we didn't really solve that problem until the last draft, because we had the whole script written, and we were doing rewrites, and we're about to head into casting, and I wasn't nervous about it, but I was still like, I don't really like the cult. I think they're too reflective of the first film. I had all these notes, and because you try to create something new, you're like, okay, what is it going to be? What is it going to be? And finally, I think when we wrote, because there's a song in the film that was a version of was in the first film as well. It was when we wrote the other verses of that that I'm like, okay, now I kind of see what they worship, what their point of view is, and then it all fell into place rather quickly once we got to that last stage. It was kind of like these terms, like the low god and the flock of the low god, and
right.
The Temple Baron, which is a character that appears in the movie, actually came to me in a dream, and it wasn't like, oh, I dreamed of this thing. It was kind of creepier than that, because this was a couple of years ago, and I something was like talking in my ear, and it said, "We are the Temple Barons. Listen to our plans." And I woke up, and I was like, "What the fuck are the Temple Barons?" And I'm like Googling it, and I'm like, "That's nothing that existed." And I wrote it down, and now it made its way into this movie. So if you watch this movie and start having visions of some other demonic world, I can't be held responsible. Because like, he just told me, listen to his plans. I'm listening to the plans.
Wow.
Oh gosh. Just part of the plan.
Came to you in a dream. You got to smudge the shit out of that room. Light some sage.
I know.
Oh wow.
I actually think it was at our last place. So
oh, okay,
we're good now. We moved out of that place.
Oh, good.
That place was super haunted, so we're out now.
It's funny because he actually had all these sketches too of the monster that he just sketched out and then kind of handled off to Russell FX.
The Russells, yeah.
And the Russells to just kind of create from those sketches, and they did such a great job bringing those original sketches to life. But I think what is so great about the monsters too is that it feels familiar but not, because it almost predates Christianity
biblical,
and it's something that's much deeper and ancient, like an ancient mythology, which definitely brings something new to the fan base, and so that was cool.
Yeah, it did look familiar, but I couldn't compare it to any other creatures. So I was wondering, what was the approach to the creature design like?
It was all based on the functionality of in the first film we had this, the main villain had this carved pentagram on his face, and we all wanted to keep a version of that going into this movie. So, what in that first movie, it was like, it's basically an upside down star, because he doesn't really have you can look at his head as the circle, but it wasn't really a pentagram. So there was something I wanted to do in this one. It's like, well, when that thing is removed and you see it's an inverted pentagram with the circle and stuff, and that was kind of where it started. Like I knew I wanted to do this shot where it came off the face. And then it was like, oh yeah. I mean, some people may not even notice it, that what it is, until later. But that was kind of the starting point for what he was going to look like.
Okay.
And kind of worked our way backwards from that.
Nice. And did you look at any biblical demonic designs or images or creatures or anything like that to kind of get the design details?
I mean, not really, because we wanted to kind of stay away from the biblical stuff. I had some artwork that I pulled. Not a lot of stuff for like the clothing. What was the clothing going to look like? And stuff for a lot of the other design work in the movie that kind of used artwork to inspire us. Like here's a basis of what this could be, more abstract-y kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that it could never really be translated literally because the artwork was so abstract. So I kind of relied on Russell effects a lot. Like these sketches were, again, like, okay, this is what I'm seeing in my head from the script, and how do we take this to the next level? So they really upped. I mean, they put all that detail into it and kind of upped what it could be.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very terrifying. I'll also
share this tidbit to like your listeners, because I know most of them are, aspiring, horror filmmakers or horror filmmakers, looking to make the next big thing. So Anthony has this huge book. There's actually piles of them. There's not just one, where there's just a ridiculous amount of like all these doodlings and sketches of just crazy monsters that you've never seen in your life. Just like stuff out of his head that he did while he was at Emerson College.
Oh, wow.
And I think that that's really interesting. And I think he forgets this stuff, but, but I think subconsciously it gets into your head, and then, years go by and, you're in the system, in Hollywood, and hustling away and trying to get your projects made. And that creativity comes back, as you're starting to, develop these new monsters and, for your next movie and whatnot. So I would say to, all the people listening now, it's like, save those books of your doodles and that creativity and during that time period, because as you kind of get bogged down with, the creativity, balancing the creativity and the business side, it becomes harder to kind of tap into that. So it's good to keep, those materials to kind of pull from and inspire you later.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point to say, like, I think some filmmakers do this, you have this catalog of, right, all these things that you've written down or drawn, or like just all this stuff, all these seeds of ideas. And eventually you find a project. This was one of those projects where I could be like, I had this set piece, I had this scare, I have all these things in my head that I could kind of bring into this movie. I think this movie, more than any, I was able to go back to like the repository and pull up things that had been lingering, and like, okay, here's like a lot of best of things that got left behind, and like, can I put them all into this film? I think because of that haunted house, kind of fun house sensibility, there is almost, I could throw a lot into it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's a great tip, because I feel like your subconscious is always giving you ideas, and you just got to keep writing them down. And it could be 10 years before you use something,
For sure.
So you need a good, like all you listeners, get a good note-taking system. Evernote is a good one.
Yeah.
I use that a lot.
For our other writing projects too. It's like a minute, like we think of something, we're like, write that down,
Yeah.
Because it could be weeks before we can kind of get back to that, to then flush that out in the script. Just because, you're always juggling several projects.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and it can be shocking when you look back at old notes and you totally forget these details, and they fit perfectly into whatever you're working on. And it's like, oh my God. It's like your past self was looking out for your future self or something. I don't know.
Yep, totally.
Just going back to what you said about something coming to you in a dream, I'm not surprised to hear that, because there were moments that were so hellish and bizarre and surreal that I thought this could only be from somebody's subconscious. This could have come through in a dream. Like I noticed that in certain other movies, like a lot of David Lynch's work, things come to him in dreams. There's stuff that you just like, our minds just can't come up with on their own, consciously. I could tell that there was a lot of, dream sequences in there. But tonally, the ending was extremely horrifying. Was that another vision that came from a dream? Because it was palpably frightening.
I think, something I like to do in horror is I always want to make sure there's something more emotionally attached in the movie that people are like, oh, that kind of hit me in a way that is either disturbing or sad or moving. And just because it's or makes you think. And just because it's horror, I think that you should always try to to reach for that higher level for an audience to be like, okay, I came away with that with a certain emotion that I wasn't expecting. So we knew the ending was going to shift tonally a little bit in the sense that it's just, we're kind of with Jessula, who plays Jessica Loren in the movie. We're with her and we're in her point of view and we're empathizing with her so much in the film. We get to that ending and it's all on her shoulders. So as a filmmaker, Jess was also the type of actor that the more I worked to make things feel real for her, the more she could just give in to the character and just let herself go with it.
Yeah.
So I think on a horror movie, especially, you can try to create an environment that is as horrific as possible. And we have this kind of, I mean, in a way, not me as a director, not like in a Kubrick way, but in a Shelley Duvall Kubrick way, but in a way that I almost like you're doing a stage play, right? You're setting an environment, you're turning down the lights, you're keeping the crew out of her eye line, and you're in darkness yourself, and you're allowing her to live in the moment and to feel scared about things. And in that last sequence, it's on the page, written with all this heckling and stuff, but that really didn't come to life until, I started to meet the other cast members and pick from the background cast who I thought were really strong and bringing them all here and saying like, okay, because I think this is an important part where you have to like throw, in some ways, production out the window, because clearly when people see the movie, there's this sequence where there's 50 people screaming and she's screaming, everyone's screaming at the same time. And I said, well, this is going to get Jess. She also doesn't know what's coming half the time. I'll talk to the background. I'll talk to the other cast. I'll talk to these. I'll be like, you do this and you do this, and she doesn't know. So she's in the moment, and then it becomes more real, and she's like, and it goes on because we're doing long takes, and then she has a real reaction to this kind of struggle session that's going on around her. And where it got her to places that were very dark and it would take her many minutes to come out of. And I think that's when you know that you're finding something special, because the actor is so affected by it. And she was very much affected by it. In fact, it felt very real to her with all these people. But when you're in that moment, you kind of have to decide, like, how are we going to retain this audio? Your sound team is going to push back, but I managed to keep it all in the movie. Just make sure you have the as many mics on it as you can, so you can clean it up as much as possible, because you want to create that environment. And the last thing you want to do is have to tell the actor, well, we got to do this in ADR. I know you gave this great performance, but we're going to have to re-record the audio. So,
right.
But I think, to me, that performance is the most important thing. If it hurts the other departments, it's worth doing.
I feel like that's a really good point, because without a compelling performance, you don't believe it. And if you don't believe it, it's not going to scare you. I mean, that being said, what are some of the keys to creating those really intense emotions within your actor while still, doing it in a safe way? Like, in other words, how do you make hell a safe space for your actors?
Natalie can talk about this too, because she's in the film and we've worked together before, and with Jess, I think it all starts in that first meeting, right? The first time you meet with an actor, especially your lead actor, I'm the kind of person that likes to break the ice immediately. Like, I don't want niceties, or I want to get to know someone within 5 minutes, and make them feel comfortable enough where they can start talking, sharing very private things about myself very quickly on so that they can feel comfortable to share on their side. And then we can really get to the heart of what is our working relationship going to be like? And if you're not feeling that with an actor, maybe they're not the right choice. Or, you as a filmmaker, you may be in a position where you have to hire a certain actor and then do your best to make that happen. But with Jess, it was very much, we had that shorthand in that first meeting. I was like, okay, we're going to be able to take this really far. So you always want that actor to be able to come to you with anything, everything, so that they feel comfortable. And we also push the more dramatic moments to the end of the schedule, so that she like could feel like she was building up to that moment, like the journey was actually there through the production and leading to this sequence or these sequences at the end. But it really is about trust. I think that's the biggest thing. Like you don't ever, if you ever make your actor feel ashamed, then you killed it. You lost all that trust.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how, like, if you feel like they're not doing what you want from them, I think it's always your job as a director to just figure it out.
Yeah.
Figure out a better way to talk to them. Figure out a better way to communicate with them. And never make them feel like they're... Also, I think this is the most important thing. Never let the schedule affect your actor. Never let... You're going to have... You as a director, here's your cast in front of you. Here's everything else behind you, which is way more going on. Never let your cast feel that. Try... And never let them feel... They may feel some of the chaos of just a set, but never let them feel the time.
Yeah.
Never make them feel like, oh, we got to get this fast. Oh, we got to do this real fast. No matter how much I'm hearing that from the producers or the AD, this is going on, then turn around and go up to your actor and just be like, we got plenty of time. Never convey that to them because you're going to stifle them if they feel like they're pressured.
I feel like that's huge. Is that a conversation you have with your first AD, like on day one, like, hey, we got to protect the actors from this?
DP and cinematographer, I think it's huge to tell them in pre-production, this is how I work. Never bring that presence to the set. Like, because sometimes DPs, once they hit a certain frustrated point, which they always will, sometimes they may start talking to your actor, like, just don't. And if that does happen, just pull them aside quietly and say, remember, like, you know. So I think it is communicating from the get-go and just trying to keep that safe space. Anyone that's going to be around your actors, make sure they're all on the same page.
This is incredibly important, too, for just to add, absolutely, like everything Anthony's saying. Trust is really the most important because there are some cases where you're not going to be able to work up to that performance. You just have to go, and that's it. And that happens a lot with your co-stars. You know, certainly happened, you know, in my role in this film. And so without that trust and that shorthand already in place with the director to know that, you know, all the chaos going on, and then they just kind of, you know, shut that off so you can just be there present with them. And, you know, the actor that you're working with, in this case, you know, Jasula, and it's just, you know, it's just me and her, me and her, me and her. And the only other person talking in my ear is Anthony. That really allows you to kind of go to these places faster, more precisely, and feel more free in them. Because yes, there's always a lot going on set.
Yeah.
A lot of chaos. There's a lot of, always. And so, you know, that ability, if you trust your director, it's much easier to shut that off as an actor, to just kind of like disassociate from it and focus on what's in front of you, which is that performance and really being in the moment.
And were you still able to kind of be in the moment despite basically having a foot in production? I'm sure you were still aware of all the chaos that was happening, you know, given your involvement in the film. Were you still able to kind of straddle both, you know, actor and also involved in the production?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when I'm acting, I'm the kind of actor that I lose myself. So, you know, and I've been doing this for a while now, and hopefully, you know, for a lot longer too, you know, but I've definitely been grateful enough to be able to do it for a while now. So having that experience under your belt definitely helps, you know, when you're kind of jumping in and you have to hit it fast, these really, really highs and lows and everything in between. But yes, I get lost in that, in the role for sure. The minute action's called, it's like I'm in a different place completely. Yeah.
Enough so where she doesn't often hear cut. This cut is like, she just keeps going. She'll keep going. Cut's like, he told, sometimes with really emotional roles, sometimes I don't hear cut, you know, because you're like in it. But Anthony told me after the fact, and our first AD did too. He's like, I worked on so many movies. He's like, you're the only one that scares the shit out of me.
Whoa.
He's like, after that first take, he's like, oh my God. Because, you know, it's like, you just got to go there. But the ability to be able to dive into that, I think as an actor and talking as a performer, is that pre-existing shorthand and trust with the director. I cannot stress that enough. Because I had worked with Anthony before, when we had just met, and it was cast in Last Shift, I knew what it was like working with him, where he has this specific vision. And he says, okay, this is what I'm going for. But then he just throws that out the window and says, okay, let's play, almost like an acting coach, which is very refreshing, because as an actor, it frees you. It frees you from these expectations of, okay, I have to achieve this, this, and that. And instead just lets you be present. And I believe that's really when the magic happens, when you're just giving, and receiving back from the other actor. And then it's like a toss, like a ball toss. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the things a director can do to earn that trust? Because it sounds like it has to happen really early on in the production or pre-production.
Pre-production.
But it sounds like it's something that you can so easily lose. But so what are some of the keys to creating and maintaining that trust?
Like Anthony said, finding a connection with each performer, that's really important. I think it's the performer's responsibility to understand the resume of the director, and their background, as much as it is the director's responsibility to understand the background of the performer and where they're coming from too. Having those chats in pre-production is incredibly important. I'm a big believer in rehearsals too. Unfortunately, on this film, we did not get to rehearse because it was just, the train was moving so fast.
And COVID stuff got in the way, unfortunately.
That was the biggest blocker, was the COVID thing.
Yeah.
So that was blocking us from Jess and I being able to rehearse. And I know, Anthony, you had some hurdles with that too. Mm-hmm. So a lot of rehearsals were done kind of, on Zoom or by ourselves. And so we kind of had to take that extra effort. So being able to just have a dialogue constantly with the director, in spite of that, the reassurances that, hey, this is what we're going to hit and this is how it's going to be on set, really helps you as a performer feel confident when you get on set to know, okay, this person has my back.
Yeah.
And this is going to work.
Makes sense.
That's really, it starts early, like the minute you cast them.
And I think it is. I think, again, it's opening yourself up to them. Don't try to pry into it. The easiest way to get someone to talk to you is to just tell them everything about yourself. Tell them the things that you're, find that personal story that's going to open them up emotionally and make them open up to you emotionally. It's not you're not manipulating the conversation. You're just being honest and saying, hey, I'm willing to talk about anything. I'm not going to be shy here. This is going to be a good professional relationship, and I'm never going to make you do anything you don't want to do, and I'm never going to make you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. And if you are in a situation where you don't get along with a cast member, because not every actor or there may be people in your movie that you did not cast, that producers may have cast or the studio may have cast, and maybe you don't get along with them that great. But I think it's still finding that what is the thing that drives them as an actor. How do they work? Figure out how they like to work. I think that's also that's a question I ask every new actor I work with. How do you like to work?
Yeah.
How do you like to be directed? I never would be embarrassed by asking it, because, I think some directors want to hold all their cards tight, maybe be like, oh, I don't want people to know my tricks, or is it is this revealing too much? And I just say, that's always a question I ask an actor. How do you like to be directed?
Yeah.
Tell me a good story of a director you've worked, especially seasoned actors, because there's two kinds of actors. There's actors that just want to be told what to do, and there's actors that don't want to be told what to do. And you just have to figure out what kind of actor there is, because you may get all be as direct as possible. Never talk about I never talk about feelings or emotions. That stuff doesn't help actors. You can't tell an actor how to have a feeling.
Yeah.
You just can't. I mean, that's not how you get. So you have to talk about facts, situation. What is the facts of this scene, and let them kind of find the answer there. But some actors are gonna be like, I don't need all this bullshit. Just tell me what you want. Just tell me. You want me to do it slower? Cool, I'm doing. You want me to say it louder? Awesome.
Yeah.
Because but they're always going to tell you, oh, don't do that. As a director, don't do that. But there are some actors that just, especially the very seasoned actors, they're so far along in their craft. They're like, so I think it's good just to ask them in that first meeting, how do you like to work? What does the director say to you that you like? And then you'll know right away what kind of actor they are.
Yeah.
Also, that builds the trust and respect. Mm-hmm. So then when you're on set, it's already there.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds it's largely about creating an environment of collaboration, figuring out how everybody can kind of collaborate to the bottom line instead of being a dictator, which I feel like is really important as a director.
Yeah.
So, I mean, going back to some of the moments and visuals, this is very scary. And it takes a lot for me to say that. And I'm sure it takes a lot, as weathered horror fans, I'm sure you had to dig deep to come up with some scares that you hadn't seen before. So what was the approach to making it scary? Because, I mean, again, I'm sure you guys wanted to come up with things that people hadn't seen before. What was the approach to the fear, as well as the tension building as well?
Yeah, I think it's all a bit of like black magic, really. I mean, it's I think when you're getting into a script, right, you always have to follow the narrative and then figure out what's coming out of that narrative naturally. Like, what are the... Because I've made horror films that aren't meant to be scary. You know what I mean? Like, I've Clive Barker's Dread is not a necessarily scary movie. Mm-hmm. It's a psychological thriller, and I made another movie kind of like that called Extremity. Mm-hmm. They're not movies that my number one approach was like, oh, I want to scare people. They're horror movies, but they're different kinds of horror films. This movie is very much a movie like, I want to scare people from like the first minute on all the way to the end, have it be that kind of joyride. So it's creating a narrative that lends itself to that I can break away every 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes and do something scary. All right. So you have to create, your narrative has to support that, both with what your lead character is doing and what your locations are. So that's right from the get-go. If you create a premise that supports that, then you'll have those opportunities to be like, okay, I'm going to scare people. And I think it's always a challenge to bring new stuff to horror fans, to make it feel like it's something new. Yeah. And I do think it comes down to the specificity of the storytelling. Because let's be honest, it's like, it's rare you're going to do something. Maybe 2 or 3 times in MALUM, I'm doing something new, right? But I'm doing a lot of things very specifically to the narrative,
right?
So that they feel, completely appropriate and new because I'm watching it with this story structure. So I think that's important, to really just stay true to your narrative and your structure in that way. That it's like, okay, somebody's jumping out of a hallway. Well, why is it scary in this movie?
Right.
Or someone's running up a stairwell and I can't see them. I think a big thing for me as a filmmaker, sound design is huge. And sound was a key component to this movie, whereas we start the sound design in the pre-production process. We have the sound team. They flew into Kentucky where we shot. We were in the location. They had 2 days in the location. They recorded just every sound that location made. We also had actor sessions with like background talent to do screams and shouts and running and various creepy sounds. And I think a few of Natalie's screams are in there as well.
Nice.
But that lends itself. That's like you're setting yourself up for success when you can do things like that. So you have to know that sound is just such a big part of horror making, horror filmmaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, like, if you're just starting out, with writing horror, we've written a couple horror scripts now. The best place to start, and at least for me too, is being a performer and an actor, is what scares you in real life. That's it. That's the question you have to ask. And instead of saying, oh, what's already been done, because there's some amazing filmmakers out there, right, that have done so many amazing things in horror. So I think it's always a bad idea to try to compare yourself to others and say, oh, well, that's already been done. Instead, just like go inward and say, well, what scares me? And you will find that answer. You will. And then work from there with that kind of coming out. And then you'll join the group of amazing, filmmakers you will find yourself discovering something new.
Yeah. Well, from that perspective, Anthony, was there any real fears that you channeled into this movie?
I mean, I'm always fascinated by like it comes up a lot in like my storytelling, is the people you can meet and you just don't know what their real motivations are. You like how much do we really know people?
Right.
You could be with someone 1,000 times and never really know them or know what their beliefs or their what they do when they're alone, right? So I think the cult factor comes into play a lot. That kind of mind think, that group think mentality, and that point of view that like someone could be completely normal, and then you're like, oh, you're in a cult, and like, oh, you just murdered someone last week. Oh, cool.
All right. Never know.
But and then Jessica doesn't even know her mother, and she discovers this, like she discovers, and she doesn't really know her father, and you kind of, this mystery unfolds with the film, and it's the stranger you don't know, and the close family member that is the stranger. It's this whole dichotomy, and just kind of working through that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. What was the approach to building tension? Because there is a lot of tension in the movie, and I think some of the best scares are led up with tension, not in the context of jump scares. I feel like everybody can see them a mile away, and they have a place. They can be fun, but a lot of the scares did not rely on jump scares in this movie. So wondering, what was the approach to building tension? And was it kind of scientific? Did you observe like, well, the audience is feeling this now, so we have to, lull them into a sense of safety, and then we gotta, do this or the other thing? How did you approach the overall tension graph of the movie, so to speak?
I think so. I think like good horror is like a magic trick. You have to entertain.
Yeah.
And divert their attention. Right? There's a process. You're doing an act, and then you're diverting their attention, and then you're scaring them. I think that's a big part of it. I think the biggest part is on the page, is that, because I don't know, as a filmmaker, I guess you have to trust your instincts, and when you're writing it, if it's on the page, you just have to make sure you carry it to the finish line. Right. Make sure that tension is on the page, that it is very scientific. It's like, okay, this is how it's building throughout the scene, and what is going to be the climax of this scene. And then trying to follow through. Because I don't know. I know when you're making a horror film, you're always kind of conveying to the cast. I think a good actor is always going to be like, this feels like it's taking too long. And it's like, no, like in a horror movie, just believe me, the audience you want to take your time with these things. You don't want to rush through it. So having the cast on board to make sure the beats land, right? Like, okay, the audience is checking themselves. Okay, I'm here with that actor. And then as an overall pace, I always go back to Predator. Like, Predator is one of my favorite films. And I think Predator is one of the best paced movies that you can get, because that movie starts as a war film. It introduces something that's alien. Obviously, at the beginning, we know what kind of movie it's going to be, but it introduces something, and it's so gradual with the steps that Predator takes that by the time you get to the last scene, and he takes off his mask, I'm like, what? Well, he's going to take off his mask? I didn't even expect that, because you can see a lot of movies. I don't know why. You watch a monster movie or any kind of horror movie, and you're like, oh man, just get to it. just get to it. Just show me the monster. Just do that thing. And I don't think you ever want your audience to be there to ever be. You want them to be just behind you. There's also things that you want them to figure it out just a little before you reveal it to them. I think it's good to let your audience in on some things because it also lets their guard down. When you let them figure something out, and then 2 seconds later you hit them with something they didn't expect. I think it's all a game. But the tension thing is tough because I think a lot of I edited MALUM too, and I think that's where you build. I think when you're in production, you just got to make sure you're getting everything you need, right? You just don't turn away until you're like, I got it, I got it, I got enough to make this work. And then in the edit is where you really build that tension.
Yeah, makes sense. I would love to hear about your time with Clive Barker early in your career. I mean, that must have been such an incredible, formidable time period. Could you talk about that time? And from what I understand, it was the beginning of your career, right?
Very beginning. Yeah, I mean, Clive, I went to Emerson College in Boston, and I transferred to, they had a program where you could transfer to Los Angeles. And that's really why I went to Emerson, because I was like, okay, I don't know anyone in Hollywood. So I go to a school that will facilitate that move for me. Like I'm going to live there, just going to go down and do my last semester. And while I was there, I was looking for an internship in horror. And I reached out to my advisor. I'm like, who do you know that's in horror? Like, is there? And she's like, well, there's Clive's company, there's Wes Craven, there's John Carpenter, and the producer that worked with Clive, he had gone to Emerson for a semester, and he then transferred to NYU, but he was from Massachusetts, like myself. So I was like, well, that's an in, right? That's someone I can talk to, and I hounded him for a while, and he brought me up to the house to meet Clive, which was, of course, like the most important meeting in my life, like to this day. It's that one meeting that's like, and when I had that meeting, we just got along, had a lot of common interests, and I know that they really needed the help at the company because they were doing a lot of things, and I got along with Joe Daly, who was the producer from Massachusetts, got along with him really well, and I started working there like as an intern. Not very long as an intern. They hired me before I graduated college, and then I was assisting Clive. And when I started working for him, I hadn't read any of his books. It was just, I was very familiar with his films, his producing and directing, but had not read anything. So he had this great library there with all his books, and I would just, every night just read a new, just read, and just consumed every book of his. And then I think I was able to kind of create a shorthand with him as well. That I was like, I could see how he wrote and see like what he focused on, and that was such a big learning experience. Something I said in another interview, like as a horror writer, it's great to watch movies, but I think those years I spent with Clive consuming his material and see how he was as an author probably made me a much better writer than any like screenplay book or anything I could read, because in a screenplay you don't have to scare, I mean you should scare your reader, but that may not be your priority as a screenwriter. As a novelist, if you don't scare your reader, they're not going to read your books. Right. So like Clive and Stephen King, right? They had to make sure that what's on the page is scary as hell. So that was my core lessons with him, watching him write and like go on the book tours with him. That was like my earliest stuff. Spending a lot of time with Clive on the book tours and things like that, and then really getting thrown into the fire there in terms of producing. Like I was in meetings I just had no business being in with like the heads of the studio, but because the company was so small, it was just, I was lucky to be able to do that. They were like, come, take notes. We just need you there, and learning from those meetings.
That must have been amazing. Were you there for the time when he was entertaining a mummy project with Mick Garris?
I know the project. Geez, I'm trying to remember if it was right before I came on or if it was during. I think that was like right before I came on.
Okay, got it.
I started there in 2002, and I worked really closely with Clive till about 2012.
Oh, wow. So you were with him for like 10 years.
Yeah, a long time. I mean, and Dread I directed in 2008, and that came out in like 2009, I think. Mm-hmm. And then, but we had other projects in development, like a lot of stuff of his all around the studios and based on his novels and things. We spent a lot of years setting up projects and then trying to get, like Midnight Meat Train we got made, and then Book of Blood. And
yeah, I enjoyed the hell out of Midnight Meat Train with Bradley Cooper. I feel like not enough people talk about it. I really enjoyed it.
I mean, it's a solid movie, and Kitamura did such a great job with that movie. It's just crazy. I mean, it has so much good action stuff in it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a whole political side of that.
There always is, right?
You've heard before, but it was a lot of drama at the time.
Yeah, that actually sounds familiar. I forgot what it was, but yeah, I remember hearing that there was some sort of nightmare that occurred. Yeah, I interviewed Ryuhei a couple years ago. Yeah, I think he got into it. I forgot the details, though. Into it. Yeah. Was there anything interesting about Clive's, or unexpected about Clive's process? I know he outlines, whenever he writes, but beyond that, was there anything fascinating about his overall process that is not as well known?
Well, yeah, no, you're right. He handwrites everything. Handwrites everything he does. Oh, and that is an extensive process. Like he doesn't ever touch a keyboard. He just takes his black ink pen, and he also writes in a very unintelligible language that you have to decide. You have to learn how to decipher Clive.
Yeah.
And then and he also is he siestas. That was a big thing. That's something he introduced in his movies too, because I think he works late. And when he was directing, he would take a break in the afternoon, just like a siesta break.
Huh.
Kind of shut the production down for that, post lunch, very European thing to do.
Yeah. How long would a siesta last?
It's usually siesta? Like 2 hours. I think it's usually about a 2 hour break.
Interesting.
And then you offset the schedule that way. But he would do that during writing, and he was, he didn't leave the house a lot. I mean, during those times, because he'd just be writing so much and keeping endless notes, and he would start so many books at the same time almost. Like he had I felt like 20 books in process going at once, and he'd have just drawers of okay, he'd organize well though, because he'd be like, okay, this is the Great Secret Show sequel, or like things that he still wants to get to. But yeah, I mean, when I was there, we would schedule like, okay, we're gonna go out, we're gonna go to the comic book store, we're gonna go to the porn store, we're gonna and that's it. That's it. Those two places, and that's it. And then, yeah, I mean, Clive was also a great photographer and painter. I mean, right. if you have people who have not, painting was he became such a prolific painter, like on his own, started painting in oils. If you haven't looked at his children's books or like the Abarat series, pick those books up, and then you go back and look at Abarat. If you look at Abarat, right, there's like a full page painting. You have no idea that painting's like 20 by 20 feet big. They were huge in his house. He had a house that only holds the paintings.
Wow. Like
6 paintings deep on each wall. Just thousands and thousands of paintings in this one house that it was a great selling tool, because like we'd bring people up to that house and we'd take generals and they'd kind of be overwhelmed by it. There's all these paintings in this house.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my God. That must have been a hell of a time.
It was a great time. Yeah, for sure. Especially a great way to start your career.
Yeah. I mean, who better to learn from? And I can now, like, after I found that out, I can see the influence in your work a little bit. Sure. I can tell that you're kind of a disciple. It's not, clearly not derivative or anything like that, but I'm like, okay, yeah, I could tell that Clive Barker mentored this guy.
Yeah. That's good.
Oh yeah. It's a high compliment.
Thank you.
I know we got to wrap soon, but a few just last quick questions. Throughout the course of your career, were there any helpful resources either books, seminars, or anything along those lines that helped you either creatively or career-wise?
Natalie, you go first.
Save the cat. I mean, I know that's like such. There you go.
It is. It's like a great book.
Great book. A great first book. Like if you're like struggling to write, it just kind of breaks everything down so easily, and you're like, "What? It's really this?" And then you're like, "Oh my gosh, it is. That's the formula," you know. And of course, you can change the rules, you know, and bend them. You don't want to necessarily break them, but that gives you like the basic gist of the formula, and then from there you can kind of, you know, mold your own thing. So from a writing perspective, that's probably the best tool. And then, you know, as an actor and performer, it's just, you know, trying to find the right acting coaches. And to be honest, like they're all extremely good, you know, in their own way, because they bring different experiences. So I personally feel like the more you study with, the more well-rounded you'll be as a performer.
Yeah.
So I've studied with many throughout Los Angeles, and each of them brought a very unique tool that I was able to add to my toolbox that I could then utilize depending on what film I was cast in and what was being required of me by the director. And so I think as a performer, the more tools you have in your toolbox, you know, from acting coaches and acting classes or doing stage plays. I did a lot of stage plays, you know, when I first started acting, and even your life experiences, the more things that you do as an actor, you know, like, you know, as a performer, like it's great to be obsessed with acting, you know, in the business and whatnot, but make time for friends and family, because in those moments, you're going to find these experiences that you can pull from later too. So it's a separate set of tools in that regard. And then, you know, for me, definitely as a writer and creator, you know, and working with Anthony, I'm a huge movie fan, huge. I watch so many movies, old movies, you know, current movies, modern movies, and every single genre. And the more that you watch, I feel like the better storyteller you become, because you start to appreciate all the nuances and interesting things that other people that have come before you put out there. And again, it starts to really get you going. And I think on a subconscious level, you start to go, okay, what really moves me in this way? And then that starts to come out. So.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, is like watching movies, watching as many movies as you can, but also then going back deliberately with a pen and paper and dissecting it.
Yeah.
Because you can't absorb it all. I mean, I think you have to look at it like, okay, why is this happening here at this point, and what does it lead to? Mm-hmm. I think being an editor is a great tool for a filmmaker. I think, because a great book on editing is called Blink of an Eye. Because to me, it doesn't matter what you do in pre-production, in production, that movie comes together in the edit.
Yeah.
You have to be hugely involved, or I watch every frame of the footage we shoot. I will just watch everything. And when I'm editing myself, that's where the movie comes together.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just becomes a different process at that point. So I think really knowing the craft of editing, so you can either communicate with an editor or do it yourself, is hugely important.
Yeah.
Anthony's right about the editing. Just to interject real quick, is that, you know, he had encouraged me. He's like, I think you'd be good at it. You know, you should pick this up. I literally just picked up editing.
Oh, cool.
And I have to say, it is changed, you know, my viewpoint even more and made it more richer into storytelling. And it's really helping me, if it sounds crazy, as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Sure,
knowing that skill set is helping me take the writing to the next level. And so absolutely agree. I mean, that's such a good tidbit.
Yeah. Now they all interlock. Mm-hmm. Well, it was a real pleasure meeting you both. Thank you for being here, and congrats on the movie. It's getting high praise, very well deserved high praise, and really, really enjoyed it. What is next for you guys?
We're going to take a break, but Natalie and I have a thriller shopping around right now called The Step Counter.
All right.
It's kind of a hand that rocks the cradle type film.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And then, you know, hopefully we do a sequel to this. I'd like to explore this world more.
Cool.
For sure.
Well, I'll be looking out for it. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Here are some key takeaways from this conversation with Anthony DiBlasi and Natalie Victoria. Number 1, make hell a safe space. I've talked with people at length on this show about how horror can be substantially more demanding on actors because it requires some of the most intense emotions. For this reason, horror directors need to take particularly great care of their actors. Anthony mentioned that it's essential for directors to shield their actors from on-set turmoil and chaos, especially schedules and time constraints. By ensuring your actors are cocooned from these pressures, even at the cost of other departments, you're able to provide them with the environment necessary for excellent performances. Number 2, an extension of number 1, forge an emotional connection with your actors. Anthony also stressed the significance of establishing genuine emotional connections with your actors. It's the director's job to uncover the emotional truth that resonates with the actor for every scene. But rather than rudely prying them for emotionally intimate details of their life, Anthony stated that he would often reveal intimate and vulnerable details about himself and how he related to a scene, which would enable his actors to open up. Art often requires vulnerability. If you want your actors to go to dark places, you have to be willing to go there first. Number 3, find out how your actors like to work. Anthony and Natalie underlined the importance of understanding your actor's preferred method of working and direction style. Encourage them to share past directing experiences, both good and bad. Every actor is different, and tuning into their specific needs and methods of working will mold you into a more versatile director. Number 3, create a repository. When it came to the creation of MALUM, Anthony mentioned that various elements, including dreams, sketches, vague ideas, and concepts, had been incorporated into the film, a lot of which he collected over a long period of time. Fortunately, his habit of consistently jotting down ideas, no matter how underdeveloped they were, provided a wealth of material, or firewood, as David Lynch would say, all of which was at his disposal during the writing process. As a result, Anthony strongly encourages the use of note-taking apps as they can be game changers. I personally recommend Evernote or Notion for this. Amassing your thoughts over time can make facing that blank page far less daunting. Anyway, guys, thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with your friends and family on social media? Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at I'm Nick Taylor. That's I am Nick Taylor, and on Twitter at the same handle. Thanks again for listening to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. We scare because we care. Hey guys, one last thing before you head off, and this is The Howl. How would you like a monthly newsletter featuring a recap of the latest horror news, my personal movie recommendations, updates from the show, and cool stuff I've recently discovered? If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, sign up for my monthly email newsletter, The Howl, today. You can sign up for The Howl by visiting nicktaylor.com/thehowl. That's nicktaylor.com/thehowl.